All right, guys, so the nightmare situation that we've been warning about for months at this point of an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah seems to be either underway or on the verge of spiraling to a point of no return. So here from Al Jazeera with some of the latest, their headline is, Lebanon says at least 356 people have been killed as Israel is bombarding the south. Now, as we're going to read some of the details here, it seems like most of these strikes have taken place in southern Lebanon, but there are some that have taken place in Beirut and also some that have taken place as far as north of Beirut. So it seems like this is a pretty significant bombing campaign that Israel is doing. And this comes obviously just days after we saw those pager attacks and the walkie-talkie attacks where Israel essentially engaged in what even the former CIA director Leon Panetta, which I'll get to here in a minute, admitted was an act of terrorism inside of Lebanon. So Israel, it seems like, wants this war, right? Now, what will the United States do in turn? How will we respond to this? We'll get to more of that here in a minute. But they start off here saying that Israeli air raids hitting mostly southern and eastern Lebanon have killed at least 356 people and wounded at least 1,246, according to the country's health ministry, which is the deadliest day of conflict in Lebanon since the 2006 Israel-Hezbollah war. They said the ministry said that the death toll on Monday included at least 24 children, 39 women, and 2 medics as the bombardments hit homes, medical centers, ambulances, and cars of people trying to flee. Let me say that one more time. Some of these bombardments hit homes, medical centers, ambulances, and cars of people trying to flee. They continue. They say that tens of thousands of Lebanese fled the south, and the main highway out of the southern port city of Sidon was jammed with cars heading towards Beirut in the biggest exodus since the 2006 fighting. And I'll show you some video of this exodus here in a minute. They say that the government ordered schools and universities to close across most of the country and began preparing shelters for people displaced from the south. Some of the attacks hit residential areas of towns in the south and the Bekaa Valley in the east. One strike hit a wooded area as far away as Byblos. I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation, but that's in central Lebanon, more than 80 miles away from the border and north of Beirut. They also say that the Israeli military has said that it's conducting a targeted strike, or it conducted a targeted strike, which I think we all know what that means, inside of Beirut without offering any immediate details. And they also say that the Israeli army has said that it struck more than 1,300 sites used by the Iran-backed armed group Hezbollah. The increased hostilities raised further fears of an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah, or even a wider regional conflagration. Israel's military warned civilians to move away from places used by Hezbollah, which launched a barrage of rockets into northern Israel on Sunday. Now, what exactly do they mean by move away from places used by Hezbollah? I mean, keep in mind, Hezbollah is not just like a militia. They are also a major political force and, institutional apparatus inside of Lebanon. So move away from places used by Hezbollah seems like a pretty vague thing to order thousands and thousands of civilians to do, but that's apparently what they said. They say the warnings ignored the possibility that some residents could live in or near targeted structures without even knowing that they are at risk. And of course, many people who received warnings told Al Jazeera that they did not know where to go. Now, we move on to some of the video of what this looked like. We have a couple different videos of explosions taking place across Lebanon. Here's one video that I saw come across my timeline. Here's another one where it seems like somebody's home has been struck by a missile and is on fire. We also have some image here and one more here where you can see a strike that has taken place and then, what seems to be a fire taking place after the fact. Now, we also have video again of what it looked like as some people were trying to flee southern Lebanon as these attacks were happening, and you can see some of these attacks on the horizon there. We also had some absolutely horrifying video here where if I turn the volume up just a little bit, should be able to hear, as described here by the Gaza Notifications account, voices coming from under the rubble of some of these strikes. Let's go ahead and try to listen to this. Absolutely disturbing stuff. And listen, guys, I mean, what you can expect to take place over I mean, the next couple of days, the next couple of weeks, I think is going to be a repeat, largely, of what we have seen inside of Gaza over the last 11 months. I mean, we're approaching almost a year of this genocide, where they have destroyed a vast majority of the housing in Gaza. They've attacked schools and churches and mosques and UN shelters and refugee camps, everything under the sun, farmland, water infrastructure. They've attacked aid workers and journalists. What we have seen in Gaza, based on some of the statements that we're getting to here from Israeli officials, it seems like that's exactly what we're going to see in Lebanon. Now, here to start us off with that, from Haaretz, an Israeli outlet, they say that Israeli minister is claiming that Lebanon cannot be defined as a state. Lebanon cannot be defined as a state, and the IDF should establish a buffer zone inside of its territory. So in other words, Israel invades and then takes over and indefinitely occupies parts of Lebanon, right? They say Israel's diaspora affairs minister, this guy Amichai Chikli, said that given the Lebanese government's failure to exercise its sovereignty over the Hezbollah-controlled southern Lebanon, the IDF has the right to take over areas from which missiles could be fired into Israel. They are trying to exert their right to take over parts of Lebanon. Now, we also have this here from Daniel Hagari, IDF spokesperson, who I think is reaching into a pretty familiar playbook, at least to people who have followed my channel. If you guys remember, back when we covered Israel's attempt to justify the destruction of Al-Shifa Hospital inside of Gaza, if you guys remember, they put out this like 3D rendering of this expansive tunnel network with weapons and with like tech, centers inside of it. And they said, underneath Al-Shifa, there's this expansive network. It's a command center. It's a control center for Hamas under this hospital, right? They put together this entire 3D rendering and model. Now, they never turned up with any sort of evidence of that, what the model was showing after they destroyed Al-Shifa Hospital, but it was a good example of the IDF trying to come up with justifications to obliterate civilian infrastructure, right? Now, here we have, again, IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari doing the same thing, but this time with what seems to be basically the entirety of civilian infrastructure across Lebanon. Let's go ahead and listen to a little bit of this. I'll put this on 1.25 times speed.
About an hour ago, following indications that Hezbollah was preparing to fire towards Israeli territory, we began striking terrorist targets throughout Lebanon. The Hezbollah terrorist organization has been continuously launching attacks on Israeli civilians and has no plans to stop. This is southern Lebanon. There are dozens of Lebanese villages situated along approximately 80 kilometers of the border with Israel. For over 20 years, Hezbollah has deployed its arms inside homes and militarized civilian infrastructure. As a result, the Hezbollah terrorist organization has turned southern Lebanon into a battlefield. This is a village in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah stores cruise missiles, rockets, launchers,
in every single home,
and UAVs
apparently,
inside civilian homes, hidden behind the Lebanese population living in the village. We are monitoring these activities, locating the weapons, and destroying them with precise intelligence-based strikes. I want to show you an example of a strike carried out a few weeks ago. Here we are exposing Hezbollah's method of hiding a cruise missile inside a home. The terrorists create...
Okay, guys, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Listen, if you have, video evidence that in somebody's house they have a cruise missile situated like this, then just post that footage, right? I'm sure you would have drone footage before you did the strike, right? You would have some sort of actual evidence for this claim. But instead we get 3D renderings. I mean, guys, in this 3D rendering, if I can find it again here, it's in every single fucking home. Am I supposed to believe, after we've seen time and time and time again with this same exact strategy being deployed to justify the endless destruction of Gaza, to the point where it's been, there's been more destruction in Gaza than basically any other place in the history of modern warfare, right? And after looking at time and time again, the IDF lying about there was a Hamas militant there, or there was a weapon that was about to fire from there, or whatever the case may be, I'm now supposed to believe that this is what's happening in Lebanon. Now, is it possible that Hezbollah has some weapons somewhere stored in civilian areas in Lebanon? Sure, that's possible. But is this what we're attempting to justify? Because make no mistake about it, when they make a 3D rendering like this, and they're showing cruise missiles, apparently everybody in Lebanon has a cruise missile inside of their house. Are we supposed to take this at face value? Anybody who takes these kinds of animations, these kinds of renderings at face value, needs to have their fucking head examined, okay? There is no organization on the face of the planet that has been demonstrably caught lying than the IDF. There's no other organization that has lied this much verifiably in front of the entire world, time and time again. So, again, these kinds of animations or illustrations that you see here, what this should show to you, what this should show to you is that Israel is planning to do to Lebanon exactly what they have done to Gaza over the last 11 months of this genocide. This is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Now, we also have, of course, the main man himself, Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, who said basically a similar thing. I'll just read it here. He says, "I have a message for the people of Lebanon. Israel's war is not with you, it's with Hezbollah." Okay, we'll see about that. It seems like that's exactly what you said about Gaza, and the vast majority of the people you've killed in Gaza have been innocent men, women, and children. Specifically, a majority have been just women and children, but he says for too long, Hezbollah has been using you as human shields. Sound familiar, right? It placed rockets in your living rooms and missiles in your garage. Rockets in your living rooms. Those rockets and missiles are aimed directly at our cities, at our citizens. To defend our people against Hezbollah strikes, we must take out these weapons. Starting this morning, the IDF has warned you to get out of harm's way. Again, how exactly are thousands and thousands of people supposed to do that as these strikes are already underway right now? Starting this morning, again, the IDF has warned you to get out of harm's way. I urge you, take this warning seriously. Don't let Hezbollah endanger your lives and the lives of your loved ones. Don't let Hezbollah endanger Lebanon. It doesn't seem like Hezbollah is the main threat to the Lebanese people right now. He says, please get out of harm's way right now. Once our operation is finished, you can come back safely to your homes. Come back safely to the homes that you're about to level to the ground. Those homes? What are you talking about? Then we move on because we also have, reports like this. One of the main Telegram channels inside of Israel, 230,000 subscribers to it, posting things like this: the Nakba of the Lebanese, obviously referring to the Nakba that Palestinians speak about back during the establishment of the state of Israel, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were violently and forcefully expelled from their lands. This is how they're discussing this in Israeli Telegram channels. Now, we also had this statement here from Kenneth Roth, which I think was important to point out. He says that Israel should not repeat its practice from the 2006 war of assuming that anyone who didn't heed its warning to flee southern Lebanon must be Hezbollah. Many civilians were unable to flee or chose not to. They remain protected under humanitarian law. And that's important to note because this seems to be what Israel is going to do in southern Lebanon. They're going to say everybody who is a civilian in the south needs to leave, and anybody who remains will be assumed to be a Hezbollah terrorist, right? And then they will carpet bomb the south. So it's important to note here that under international law, not that Israel gives a single solitary shit about that, nor does the United States apparently, but under international law, if you are a civilian, if you are a non-combatant, you are still protected. Whether or not an enemy military tells you to flee the entirety of any given area of a country, they are still protected under international law. Now, should also note that this strategy of telling everybody to leave an area and then obliterating any living thing that remains is exactly what they're doing in Gaza. It's what they've been doing, and it's what they continue to plan to do. Here we have the Prime Minister, again, Benjamin Netanyahu, saying this, quote, this is just from yesterday. He says, "We have to tell the residents of North Gaza that they have 1 week to evacuate the territory, which then becomes a military zone." Then becomes a military. Look at what you've done to the north of Gaza. It's already been completely obliterated. I thought you had already defeated and eradicated Hamas in the north, and that's why you moved south to Khan Yunis, and then you moved south to Rafah, right, to finish the operation. No, now you're saying we have to go back to the north, tell everybody to leave, and then anybody who remains, we're going to destroy them. That's what they're saying here. He says this is a zone in which every figure is a target. And most importantly, no supplies enter this territory. So it's not just that they're telling everybody to get out, regardless of whether or not that's even possible for many people, and regardless of whether or not they even have the right to tell an entire city of people, an entire region of people to leave. But on top of that, they're saying we're going to obliterate that after 1 week, after we've already obliterated it the first time, and also we're going to cut off supplies from entering this region, so we're going to starve you as well. And again, this is in the north of Gaza. This is an area that Israel supposedly had already taken control of, which I think should tell you, just as a reminder here, not that this was any secret, but that everybody understands at this point that Israel is never going to be able to eradicate Hamas. That was never on the table. U.S. officials don't believe that. Many Israeli officials don't believe that. And yet they are still going forward with this kind of shit. 11 months into this. Now, again, as I told you guys, what's the U.S. response to this? Well, I think it's pretty predictable at this point. U.S. is sending more troops to the Middle East, the same region, by the way, where we already have tens of thousands of troops stationed there, but we're sending more as violence rises between Israel and Hezbollah. We're also sending some warships. I think it was the USS Truman, took an early trip over there, just leaving today. So not only are we unwilling to use any leverage whatsoever over Israel to force them into accepting a ceasefire in regards to Gaza, which would naturally lead to an end of hostilities with Hezbollah, not only are we not willing to use any leverage over them to force them into that position, but we're sending troops to the region to potentially fight a regional war on their behalf. More specifically, on Benjamin Netanyahu's behalf. Because, again, to protect his own political ass, to protect his own career, he needs this to keep going. He needs this to keep escalating, or else his coalition that's keeping him in power falls apart, and that's the end of him. And so this is terrifying, guys. Like, we are actually on the verge of getting ourselves into another endless war in the Middle East. For what? For what? Because you weren't willing to stop the weapon shipments to Israel? You weren't willing to apply leverage to end a genocide of the Palestinian people? You are allowing them to escalate time and time and time again. Guys, they assassinated Ismail Haniyeh on Iranian soil. That was the political leader of Hamas, the chief negotiator of a potential ceasefire. They assassinated him in Iran. That's as dramatic of an escalation that you could possibly ask for. And here's an unfortunate truth. Here's a real uncomfortable truth for many Americans. The only reason that this has not already turned into a massive regional war, including Iran, including elements in Iraq and Syria, including Hezbollah, including the Houthis, the only reason that has not happened yet is because Iran, and Hezbollah for that matter, so far have shown an incredible amount of restraint. So, from the U.S., State Department perspective, Iran and their allies or their proxies or whatever you want to call them, they are the unhinged, uncontrollable actors in this situation, right? But the reality is they've shown far more restraint than Israel has. They've shown far more restraint and control than the United States has. That's uncomfortable for a lot of people to hear, but that's not me saying I'm a fan of the Iranian government or I'm a fan of Hezbollah or whatever the case may be. That's just the reality. That's the only reason that this hasn't spiraled beyond where it is right now, okay? So, again, terrifying situation that we find ourselves on the brink of. Again, we also had the former CIA director, Leon Panetta, who called Israel's pager explosion that took place in Lebanon a few days ago, and a terrorist operation, which hard to see exactly how you could disagree with that. You're quite literally terrorizing psychologically the entire population of Lebanon, who now have no confidence whatsoever that their personal communication devices won't just explode in the middle of the day, right? We saw this take place. Some of these were going off in grocery stores, on buses, in the middle of streets, on sidewalks, etc. This was a terrorist attack. When the former CIA director is admitting that, I think it's a pretty clear-cut case. Yet we still have basically no condemnation whatsoever from the U.S. State Department, and we even have politicians like John Fetterman, who I saw the other day, who are openly praising this attack. They are praising what even the CIA director called a terrorist attack, right? But Rashida Tlaib has to be censured by Congress, right, for saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. but we have senators who can openly praise terrorist attacks when it's Israel doing the terrorist attacks. Tell me how that makes sense. Now, finishing off here, if you had any sort of misunderstanding in terms of what exactly Israel's long-term goals are for the Palestinian people, we have this update here from TRT World, posted by Global Eye News, where Israelis, not kidding guys here, this is Daniela Weiss, who is the leader of the settler movement in Israel, and they are now selling off boat tours to go and look at the destruction of Gaza happening in real time, and planning out where they may potentially want to live in Gaza once the genocide is fully completed. This is what's happening, guys, right in front of our eyes, right in front of the entire world. This isn't even something they're hiding. She's giving an interview here. She's not hiding away from the camera. She's not doing this in secret. They are proudly doing this in front of the entire world. And the U.S. government, instead of holding Israel to account, holding ourselves to account and just following U.S. domestic law that says that it's totally illegal for us to continue shipping these weapons to Israel, instead of abiding by this international rules-based order that we have pretended that we support, instead of just abiding by that, applying mild pressure on Israel, which is all that it would take, we are willing to blow up the entire region into a widespread war on Israel's behalf.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying